Well, hey guys, welcome back to Pin Turning 101, and this is part 6. We're going to now take the blanks that we have prepared for the cigar pin kit, and we're going to put them on the lathe and start turning them. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the techniques for turning and some of the tools that you'll need. So I hope you'll join with me, and let's get started.
The pin barrels have been prepared. I got the mandrel saver mounted on the lathe. Now I'm going to add the cap bushing. Next comes the short pin barrel. Next comes the center bushing, which is a step bushing. Then the long pin barrel, followed by the bushing for the tip. And now I'll just bring the tailstock up, tighten it down just enough to where it locks together so that I can start turning the blanks. I position the tool rest where it's about 1/8 of an inch below the center point of the mandrel rod, and also look down and try to line it up with the bed of the lathe to kind of get it in a straight orientation as well. I use a small roughing gouge for most of my pin turning. They're real easy to use because of the size of this project. You know, a small gouge works very well. Uh, I will occasionally swap over and use a skew chisel, but the skew chisel requires a little bit more practice. They're a little more, they're less forgiving, and you need to know what you're doing when you're using the skew chisel. But what I'm doing right now is I'm taking these square blanks and I'm using the roughing gouge to turn these down to cylinders. And I'll continue to turn these. You just want to remember your ABCs of wood turning. You want to make sure you anchor the gouge onto the tool rest and get your bevel riding on the piece of wood, and then gently lift where it starts to cut into the wood. And I'm just going to keep working on this until they become cylinders, and then I'm going to stop every now and then and inspect, and I'm going to work these down, continue working these down till I get the profile for the pin that I'm looking for. And I'm just going to get maybe a 1/16 of an inch proud of the bushings on each end of the pin barrels. And then we'll be ready to swap over to the sanding step.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the different chisels that you'll use. This is a basic roughing gouge, and I like to use the small chisels for small turnings like pins. You can get a little bit more control with these. Probably not recommended for bigger turnings, but this is the roughing gouge, and really, if you get down to it, this is probably one of just the basic tools that you'll need, and I pretty much do most of my turning on pins with the roughing gouge. You know, mainly the roughing gouge is used to turn a square piece of wood into a round cylinder. And for a pin, though, most of my pins that I do are, you know, pretty much turned to a round cylinder, and then I taper them a little bit. So the roughing gouge does a really good job. It just doesn't do as clean of a job as maybe a skew chisel. So you do have to do a little bit more sanding when you get done. But very easy to use, very easy to master real quick. The other chisel that I've talked about is the skew chisel. And this can be used on, this is a small skew chisel that can be used on pins. And again, if you use this, it gives you a much cleaner planing cut on the pin blank. And the only thing you got to be careful with, these things are not real forgiving until you know how to use them. But you got to be cognizant of this little point here. If this little point gets into your turning, then you can catch and really mess up your pin blank. So you really do, what you do is you turn this thing at an angle, like a 45-degree angle as you're going across the wood, and you're really trying to cut about in the middle of the tool here, not at the tip and not at the bottom heel, but sort of somewhere in the middle. And it gives you a very smooth cut, but again, you got to be careful about this tip getting dug into the wood somewhere and maybe causing it to chip the wood out. So if you can definitely experiment with this and practice with this, and if you get good at it, then it will cut down on a lot of the sanding that you have to do on the pen. Another tool that I use occasionally is called the Spindle Master, and you notice it's got a bevel on the bottom, and it's got a flat top. And this works very much like the skew. It gives a very clean planing cut on the blank, but notice it doesn't have any sharp points like the skew, so it's less prone to catch in the wood. But it does a pretty good job with planing cuts, and leaves a very smooth finish when you get done. Okay, another tool that you might use from time to time is the parting tool, and basically this is used to create a tenon with some pen kits. And a tenon is basically a step down in the diameter on your pen blank, but you may have to use this for some kits to do a tenon so that you can glue on a center band or something else like that. So those are going to be used occasionally. And another tool that you might use if you're going to if you like to add beads or coves to your pen, which I don't really do that. I like to keep mine as a simple smooth contour and profile, but some people like to put beads and coves. And if you're going to do some of that, you might want to consider getting a small, this is like I think a 1/4 inch spindle gouge. So something like this can be used to do beads and coves. And if you get good with the skew, you can also do beads and coves with the skew chisel as well. And then another thing that you might want to look at doing is some people like to take these wire burners. I don't know if you can see that. It's pretty much like a guitar string, and it's got some wooden handles on the end. You can buy these commercially, but you place these down on top of your wood, and the friction of the wire just creates a nice burn mark all the way around the blank. It's really used for accents if you want to add any kind of a accent mark to your pen. So those are some of the tools that you might want to consider. But again, you don't need all of these tools to turn pens. I just wanted to make you aware of the different tools that are out there.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the sanding step. And because I use a roughing gouge, I usually start out with 120 grit sandpaper, and that will take a lot of wood off. So if you need to take some off to get the profile down and to get it smooth, I like to start off with that. Now, if I'm using a skew chisel and I already have the profile down to where I want it, then I might start off with, say, 220 grit. But I'll use the 120, and then I'll move to 220 grit, and then probably 400 and up to 600 grit, and then stop. And I'm not showing you all that, but what I like to do between grits is I like to turn the lathe off and inspect the pen barrels. And I also like to take the sandpaper and sand longitudinally or up and down the length of the pen barrels to get any kind of circular marks off that were left from the sanding when the lathe was turning. Okay, like I said before, I normally stop at 600 grit, and if you're going to do what we call a CA finish, stopping at 600 is probably good enough. 90% of the time though, I do a friction polish on my pens, so I like to take the sanding to another step, and I like to use the micro mesh cloths. And so what I'll do is I'll usually take those and run those on there. I'll use maybe 1500 and then maybe go up to 2400 micro mesh, and that gives the wood a nice silky and polished finish. And I just like to do that because, again, I like to use the friction polish, which will eventually over time kind of wear off.
Okay guys, well I hope you enjoyed the part 6 video. And part 7 we're going to get into how to finish the pins. We're going to talk about some of the materials you'll need and the technique. So I hope you'll join with us. Hey, take a minute and please share this video with your family and friends. Please like it, and I hope you'll consider subscribing. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.